Hi, welcome everyone. It's October 25th, 2024. We are less than 2 weeks away from, we always say it, the most important election of our lifetimes, but a lot of people think that now. November 5th is coming, but we live in Connecticut. This is a Connecticut program, and most of my guests in studio are from Connecticut. Did you know you could vote now today, that we have early voting in Connecticut for the first time? So we're going to learn all about that and talk all about our responsibilities as citizens to vote with a wonderful guest, Joanne Moore, who the last time we saw her was a president of our area League of Women Voters. She is now the president for the entire state, or co-president of the League of Women Voters Connecticut. Welcome, Joanne.
Thank you, Sheila, for inviting me back. It's a joy to be here.
Well, it's great because it's important. Right?
It is so important.
And now we're getting up to the final days leading up to the election. You must be very busy.
We are very busy. We have worked so hard. Our mission is to educate voters and to empower them and to defend democracy, which is a significant issue right now.
Right. So I want people to know that the League of Women Voters, as you said, your main mission is to empower voters, learn how to vote, learn how to register, learn how to go to the polls. You may have some positions on certain issue areas, like I know you're interested in climate change and reproductive freedoms, but you do not take a position on the candidates,
Correct.
Right?
The League of Women Voters is 104 years old, and we have always been nonpartisan. So we don't support candidates or parties, but we do try to educate the voters by helping the candidates get their message out to everyone.
Right.
And we do that in a couple of ways. Well, more than a couple of ways. We do it in every way we can think of. We have social media. We printed thousands of brochures and pamphlets on topics like how to vote if you have a disability, how to vote if you're out of town, how to vote if you're in college, early voting, the no excuse absentee ballot referendum that will be on the ballots this week. We also educate them with a system we call vote411.org, and we can talk a lot about that. And we do TV shows. We speak to Rotary clubs and Lion clubs,
Right.
and anybody who will have us.
So you go back to about 1920. So if you know your history, you know that that was the year that women finally got the right to vote.
That's right.
In the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, right?
That's right.
But just talk a little bit about that. I know that the League of Women Voters came out of that because once women got the right to vote, they needed, or the League felt, they needed an organization to help empower them to learn how to go and vote, and maybe not be under the influence of the other people of the household, namely the male influence, to learn on their own and to vote on their own. Wasn't that a motivation?
Absolutely. The role of women in society in 1920 was very low. They had almost no rights at all. And it's hard to imagine that that was just 100 years ago, how much our lives have changed, in large part because women got the vote. And when we say women got the vote, I want to be clear that it was white women who got the vote. Women of color, women from China, indigenous women. In many states, those women didn't get the vote until the Civil Rights Act of 1965.
Right. So you're talking about after the Civil War, let's go back. We had an amendment, I think it's the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, gave the right to vote to the freed slaves, but to the men. Now, I know through history that I've studied that in 1848, before the Civil War, there was the Seneca Falls Conference. And what happened there? What was that all? That was like some of the beginning movement.
Yeah, Susan B. Anthony gave a speech at that, and it was based on the Bill of Rights in the American Constitution. She just worded it differently to include women, because there's no mention of women in the Constitution.
It didn't say women can't vote.
And we still don't have the Equal Rights Amendment. So there's still no mention of women in our Constitution. So that's something that we need to work on next.
And even the constitutional amendment in 1920 that gave women the right to vote just says you cannot deny a person the right to vote on the ground of her sex.
Correct.
Right. Didn't even mention the word women specifically
That's
there.
right. That's right.
But so to go back, so women, as you said, even in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, women in America, even white women, didn't have the right in many cases to contract. They didn't have the right to get a divorce. If they did leave their families or try for a divorce, they might lose their rights to their children. There was they couldn't get credit to purchase things. They were in so many ways almost enslaved to the male population.
They were almost considered property of their husbands.
Yes, they very much was. And it really wasn't until the 1950s, 60s, and 70s in some states that it was no longer even a crime to abuse your wife or to rape
her.
your wife. And that changed only in the last 50, 60, 70
That's right.
years. So the progress has been pretty good in the last 100 years, but I guess we ask, why did it take that long? So in 1848, they said for the first time, wait a minute, why aren't we included? And there was some very far-reaching women of prophecy like, Carrie Chapman Catt and
Susan B. Anthony.
Yeah, and that at that conference there was even a black man there.
There was it Booker Washington?
No, Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass.
He
that's
came
right.
to that conference.
He did.
And he spoke in favor of women's rights in general and women getting the right to vote.
Almost concurrently, though, there was another such conference happening in Philadelphia that was black women. Black women were not in Seneca Falls. So there was even a divide there. It's like one little group at a time got their vote.
Right.
We couldn't get everybody in at the same time. The League of Women Voters now is trying to be more inclusive. We understand and we recognize that we had that fault in our past. We recognize now that we are stronger together, that we're more creative together, and our outcomes are better when we have people of all races, all genders, working together.
Right. So just kind of to take the trajectory of that history, so 1848 was that big conference that this movement is bubbling up amongst maybe more white women. And then the Civil War came along and black freed slaves got the right to vote.
And many of the white women had fought for the slaves to be freed, and then the black men got the vote,
right,
and the women
so they were kind of upset with that. And then it took from the 1860s all the way to 1920. There were marches, there were arrests, there were beatings of women. It wasn't until World War I, and finally President Wilson, it took him a long time to come along as well. Finally,
yes.
he recognized, and then some black groups did come in. I don't know, Joanne, if you are familiar with the Broadway show that's happening right now called Suffs, which is a shortening for the suffragist movement.
And suffragists is the correct word.
Not suffragette.
Suffragette is
right.
Not as respectful
Right.
as
Suffragist
suffragists.
movement.
Our League of Women Voters took the train down to New York to see that show, and then the cast and crew came out afterwards to address the League. It's quite a spectacular show. It will be ending in January, so I encourage anyone who hasn't seen it yet
Right.
to go. And the other great Broadway show is What the Constitution Means to Me. And it's a one-woman show, and it's now across the country.
Oh,
you
really?
can see it. It's off Broadway now.
Yeah.
And it was initially directed by a young man from East Lyme who
really?
was in Jesus Christ Superstar with my son at East Lyme High School. And it's about what does that Constitution mean to a woman? Am I protected by that Constitution?
Right.
It's very nebulous whether we are protected by our Constitution.
Right. So as you said, women got the right to vote, but because after the Civil War, the Reconstruction movement tried to bring black people into government in all spheres of our culture, in our to our economy, and to our politics. But the southern states clamped that down with Jim Crow. And so, in order to vote, if you were a black male between the Civil War and the 1920s, you had to pay a fine, you had to recite an alphabet. There were lynchings, there were things that prevented you from having any rights. And that was a terrible blight on our history.
Our history, we can't be proud of all of it. There were 4,800 lynchings in the South of black men trying to vote. That's not nothing.
No.
And then they did have to pay a poll tax. They had to answer questions about the Constitution.
Oh, and I've read stories in the wonderful biography of Lyndon Johnson, under whose administration in the 60s, 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed. There were stories about the registrars in the town halls having certain hours when black people came to try and get to vote. They were in their offices, but they made believe it was closed.
Yeah.
And come back tomorrow, and they just couldn't come. And then maybe their houses were firebombed or whatever. So it was a treacherous, you're right, awful period in history. And it took until the 1960s, and during that time, in the early 60s, when you had people from everywhere volunteering to go down to the South, freedom marches, marches to try to register people to vote. They got killed.
They did.
We had people murdered just because they were trying to help people get rights. So you're right, we don't, but in America, I don't know if you think of it that way. I always think, yes, we had our faults, but we have the basic Constitution that says we're all equal. And then as each generation comes along...
No, we don't. We don't have an equal rights amendment.
No, but it says all men you're right. All men,
it says all men are created equal. Yes.
But we have some values of equality in there.
Yes.
And it seems in each generation we try to move along and make some progress in getting more and more rights. We don't want to get political about the presidential election, but I am going to say something political. For the first time in our history, I have a feeling now that we move backwards instead. It's usually an upward trajectory. You know, sometimes there are lapses along the way, but there's a feeling on the part of some of us now that we can't go back, but we may have moved back a bit.
There is resistance to progress. There's resistance to change. Part of it's human nature and part of it's just mean.
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm in the League of Women Voters and why I invite anybody to join the League of Women Voters, male, female, binary, age 16 and up. We are nonpartisan and we just fight for democracy. My dad was in the military, my brothers were in the military, my husband was in the military, and I never did anything for my country. I always felt kind of small because of that. And so this involvement gives me a peaceful way. Our vote is our most peaceful voice of resistance. You can march all you want to, but until you vote, your voice won't be heard. So this is why I'm in the League of Women Voters, is to kind of do my share.
Yeah.
I've had the benefits of being an American all my life, and it's time for me to protect that for the next generation.
And of course, one of the most important things that the League does is register. You have registration drives.
We
and
do.
This is something that I'm going to ask you your opinion of. I don't know what the numbers are in Connecticut, but nationwide, if we have 30 million Americans and about 160 million voted in the presidential election last time, we've got at least 50, 60, 70, 80 million people between 18 and up who don't even bother to register to vote. That's almost a third of our voting population.
It really worries me.
What is your thought about that?
I think that those people feel so what do you say, marginalized, that their views are not represented in either candidate. They say it doesn't matter to me which of them wins because neither of them is going to help me, which I think is really sad. And I think that we need to increase our civic education in our schools and in our adult education programs to make people feel more empowered, because they do have power.
We like to think we're the best country in the world, yet there are many other nations who have much higher percentages of voting than
It's
we do.
required to vote in Australia, in Peru. There are many countries where it's required that you vote, and if you don't, you're fined, and it comes out of your paycheck. So there are people in Connecticut, a former Secretary of the State, who's advocating for universal suffrage, that everybody has to vote.
What is it? Does the league have a position on that?
No, we don't.
So the question is it a right? Is it a responsibility?
It's
is it
both.
a requirement of citizenship? I guess those are the thoughts about it.
Well, I think it's both. I think our generation, certain generations were raised with a sense of entitlement, that what can you do for me? But John Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And so it's both. There are times in our lives where we want to give back to our country, and other times where we need help from our government.
Yeah. Well, you don't only work for the national elections, which we're
Correct.
maybe, even in Connecticut, we're considered pretty good. We get about 80% of registered voters. I mean, there are still, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people who don't even bother to register. So 80% is considered pretty good in Connecticut on the presidential level. But here's the other interesting thing. Maybe you work on this too. On the local level, sometimes they get 10, 20, 30%. But what happens in your community, your lights, your streets, your sidewalks, your electricity, your education, your other civic things go on, that's happening in your immediate life today.
Your taxes. Yeah.
Why do you think there's such a disconnect? People are not rushing, we don't have enough people even voting nationally, but why do you think there is such a disconnect on the level of your local life in politics?
It's such malaise. It's such a shoulder shrug that it doesn't matter. And I think that local elections are really important because they affect our everyday life.
Yeah.
And also, local voters screen candidates because most elected officials start at a local level and then move up to state representative, state senate, governor, U.S. Congress, U.S. Senate. But they need to be weeded out by those of us who know them.
Right.
So that we keep the good candidates moving up that rank.
Right. So before we go on to what's happening now, what we need to
Yes.
do between now and November 5th, anything you want to say about the history of the League and its programs?
I think we've covered it pretty well. We have two arms. One is voter education and protecting democracy, and the other is advocacy, so that we educate legislators about issues that we care about. So that's the other half of what we do. So once these people are elected, we don't just leave them off on their own. We are constantly up at the state capitol and in their offices, giving them more information to help them make good decisions about the bills that are before them.
Right. Okay. So the other thing that you do, and I think you said that you were in charge of the debate part of your organization. How does that work?
I'm the debate manager for Southeastern Connecticut, but I also train the moderators of debates statewide. So we believe that debates are important, and the League of Women Voters US used to do the presidential debates on television, and we even won an Emmy for our debate management on television in the 1980s. So our local elections are a lot of fun. the candidates are honest, they're straightforward. We ally with other groups, like we had a great debate at NFA last week on the 17th, and we had 2 different races on the stage at the same time, one for state senate and one for state representative. And the students at NFA actually developed some of the questions, and they were the timers for the debate. So the candidates are allowed to speak for 60 seconds or 90 seconds, and the students will hold up a sign that says, you got 30 seconds left, you got 15
Right.
seconds left. And the students just did a great job.
Okay.
I think Norwich can be very proud of its NFA students.
But the proof is in the pudding. How many of those 18-year-olds, after they graduate high school, are going to register and actually vote? One of the issues we've had the last 2 presidential elections is that the younger people were not voting in the numbers that we would hope that they would.
This generation, ages 18 to 30 right now, have grown up in a world very different from the one we grew up in. Their first memory is the Sandy Hook shooting. They've had active shooting drills in their schools instead of fire drills. They've had forest fires, floods, storms.
Isn't that more of a reason to become an advocate, or no?
But they've never felt safe. They have a level of underlying anxiety that I don't know that we can really understand, because they're children and they had their brains weren't fully developed when these awful things happened. And so they have a whole different view of the world. And I think that we need to start to try to understand them better so that we can work together and include them and welcome them into a leadership role.
Are they being included in your work?
We have worked with the University of New Haven students to create videos for public service announcements. We go to all the high schools and register the kids to vote. We're trying to do more civic education now. We've been up at UConn. We registered 550 UConn students to vote last month. So we are reaching out. We are trying.
Can you predict that this year there will be a larger percentage of young people voting than in the past?
I hope so. We'll see. It appears that'll be true.
And we'll get into this when it comes to registering and then voting. Let's talk about it right now. We're on that subject. You're a college kid. You live in Norwich, but you go to school in Storrs at UConn. And you were registered to vote when you lived at home. What do you do now when you're in Storrs, and do you have to drive back to Norwich where you're registered, or what do you do?
That's a choice. You can
Okay.
do that, or you can apply for an absentee from your hometown.
But you're only considered still a registrant in your hometown, in the place you registered initially.
Unless you register in Storrs.
Can you register in Storrs? Can you
Absolutely.
change your registration? Let's say you're registered in Norwich, but you want to change your registration because you're living in Storrs for 4
Sure.
years.
You just-
Can you do that? How do you do
Absolutely.
that?
You go to your Storrs town hall and go to the town clerk's office, the registrar of voters office, and fill out a new form. Or you can do it online.
You can do it online.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. And how many days before the election can you do it? And I
It's
guess this
too late
question
now.
is for anyone.
It's too late now to register online or to do a mail-in voter registration, but you can register in person at the town hall.
And what happens to your registration in Norwich? How does that get canceled off the books?
The registrar in Storrs will contact the registrar in Norwich.
What if you don't tell them that? You just you go to Storrs and you say, I live in Norwich, but I want to register here because I'm living here now. Will the registrar ask them?
Yes.
Yes, you'll find out.
Yes, what they're going to do really is do a change of address form.
Okay. So it makes it a small bit difficult. Now, what if you're out of state? So you're in Ohio at college and you live in Norwich. What do you do then? You must do your absentee.
You can, or you can register to vote in Ohio.
Okay. But you made an interesting point. We're still about 12 days away from November 5th, when do you lose the right to send in a application for an absentee ballot? If you're a student in Ohio with a Norwich registration, are you out of luck?
I don't know that there's a deadline to apply for an absentee ballot.
But they have to be in by a certain
They have
date.
to be back in the registrar's office by election day,
Okay.
because at 8 o'clock on election night,
So
It
how do you get
stops.
that absentee ballot? Can you do it? Try to do it online? Can you call the town
you
clerk
can call the town clerk or town
and have
registrar.
them mail it to you, and then you can send it. Try to send it back by
As
election
soon
day.
as you can.
Okay. All right. So these are these little things where there are people that may be getting stuck, and oh, I forgot I had an appointment with something else. I had a test. I thought I was going to drive home for
Yep.
election day, but now I can't. We
Well,
don't get
and
their vote.
if the student is here in Connecticut, they can do same-day registration here. So if they're from Ohio and they're a student
Yeah.
at UConn, they can just go to
That's
the town.
wonderful to just go to
town
your
clerk
town hall
and just register
and
that
just
day.
register. Now, many town halls is where you register, but depending on the size of the town, they may have more than one location to vote on
Correct.
election day. So if you register that same day, will you vote right there when you?
Maybe not.
They may send you to the area where your residence is.
Correct. You can still register to vote, but then you'll have to go to wherever your polling place
Okay,
is.
so the polling place may be at your college.
That's right.
Okay, does UConn have a polling place?
I don't know.
Okay, well, they probably that would be great if they
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
right? And you could go there same day.
Yep.
Again, who's educating the college community?
Well, we have been at UConn. We've been at Three Rivers. We've been at Conn College.
Okay,
And they are on their toes.
okay, all right.
Um,
So now, is there anything else we have to say about that 18-year-old group that may be in college, that may be away during the
They may be in
election?
the military.
They may be in the military. How does that work
Yeah.
with the military
And they
people?
have to do mail-in voting as well, absentee voting.
They have to do the absentee.
Yep.
Okay. And again, to do that, you have to either online
Yeah.
or some direct contact with the town clerk of the
Correct.
community where you're going to vote in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then they mail you your ballot. Follow the directions exactly.
Exactly. You have and it's not easy. There's an envelope
You have
and
to
another
sign
envelope.
here. You have to sign
Right.
there. Yeah, in a couple different
Okay.
envelopes. It's
right.
it's not easy,
and
but you're a
then-
college student. You can do this.
And then you have to mail. Well, now we're talking about military or
And
people out of the
military.
country.
That's right.
So they have to gauge. They have to start early. It's too
They
late to
do.
start doing that today.
It is.
October 25th. You should be doing that
should have been
a month
done,
ago
yeah.
or so.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that talks about military and college kids.
Yeah.
Just the average person. What are there? If they're not registered, you can go on election day. Is
Yep.
that right?
On election day, you can register to vote.
Register and vote. And what do you have to bring with you? Because lots of states talk about IDs and all
Hopefully, you'll have a driver's license that you can bring with you. You will need either a driver's license number or the last 4 digits of your social
that.
security
Okay,
number.
you can bring a social security card too. That's not only the driver, because some people don't have a driver's
That's right.
license.
That's right.
So something that denotes, especially your social security card
Yeah.
or something, or even a bill. I was told certain.
Yeah. On voting day, you can bring just a bill. But to register to vote, you need
You need
a
the more
picture
ID. You need
yeah.
a picture or a social
Yeah.
security card.
Yeah.
So that's important, and that you can do at the registrar's office
Mm-hmm.
on the day of,
That's right.
and right there, and then vote. Or then they might send you to the district voting place.
Your polling place.
Yeah, because for example, I live in Colchester. We have 3 voting
Yeah.
districts.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to register, you go to the
Town
town hall.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe in some communities you can vote right there. You can register and vote at the same time right there.
Yeah, exactly. It depends
Yeah.
on your town.
Depends on the.
Yep.
Every town registrar has specific rules.
That's right.
All right. So, do you know? How many people have you helped register so far this
Oh,
year?
gosh.
I mean, do you feel like you've made progress in getting the unregistered to vote?
Do you know, Well, we did 550 at UConn.
Yeah.
I think at Connecticut College, we certainly did less than that. Most of them are registered. They registered when they got their driver's
Okay.
license, because you can do that now at the Department of Motor Vehicles. So very often our voter registration drives, and I think we've done about 30 of them in the past 3 months, are mostly voter education. Education about the new early voting system.
Yeah.
Education about the ballot question that is on, there's a referendum on the ballot,
Right. We'll talk.
and it's at the very top of it. And so we've done education on that referendum as well. But the voter registration drives are more about, have you moved? Do you need to change your address? And certainly we've gone to assisted living facilities and helped people change their address
Right.
there so that they could get an absentee ballot
Yes,
there.
so absentee ballots. And I'm sure there are lots of drives to senior communities and assisted living communities, so that
Yes.
people can either be given rides to the polls if they need it, or get their absentee ballots. So let's talk about that referendum, because we're going to talk about early voting too. I voted already, and I noticed on the ballot, on the bottom part of the ballot, are all the candidates listed and so forth. But right at the top, before the candidates are listed, is the referendum, which says that we need to pass a constitutional amendment in Connecticut so that we could have no excuse absentee ballot.
Right.
So before that, tell us, you needed to have a reason.
There are 6 different reasons that are acceptable right now to get an absentee ballot. One is being in the military or not living near your home. Illness. And illness is a very vague thing. It could be your own illness, or it could be that you're taking care of someone who's ill, that you're working at a poll outside your town on election day, and so you wouldn't be able to get there. So there are 6 reasons why one person could get an absentee ballot now, and you need to, under penalty of perjury, swear that
to
you
that.
have one of these
Right.
reasons. And so we would like to make absentee balloting more accessible to more people. This almost 40 states now have this, and they've had it for years. Connecticut's really behind the 8 ball on this. So that this would just make it easier for a young mom with 3 kids to vote.
Right. No, you don't need any excuse. So it is interesting that there are some states, particularly out west, who use mail-in voting almost exclusively
Exactly.
for their elections, and they have no issues of voter fraud,
That's
and it's
right.
perfectly safe, and they get a greater amount of people percentage voting.
Right.
And, you know, in the last election, some people made a big bugaboo about mail-in voting, that it was fraud. It's not.
Well, there was one incident in Bridgeport
One
where there
incident.
was fraud. Out of how many millions of votes,
Right,
there was
right.
one handful
Yes,
of ballots.
right.
But it was fraud, and it shouldn't have been done, and the system worked.
Right,
The video surveillance
Right.
picked up
The
on
system
who it
worked.
was.
right.
They were able to intervene and
Okay.
manage the problem.
And so, just to go a little more into that, 4 years ago, we got absentee ballots because of COVID. The governor had a special exemption on the
Correct.
absentee ballot rules, and said that all you had to put down was, in this current environment, a COVID excuse was good enough. We had
That's
to have a
right.
special law about it for that particular election. Now that we don't have the COVID exemption, we just want to say, for no reason at all, no excuse, all you have to do is apply for it, you'll get your ballot, you can vote under any
And
circumstances.
it's in U.S. mail, so any interference in that would be a federal crime,
Right.
because it is mail fraud then.
Right.
So that's a pretty serious penalty
Right.
for trying to interfere with someone's absentee ballot.
Right. Okay. So that's the absentee ballots. Tell people to make sure when you get your ballot, if you're going to vote in person, that you see that, because I guess every town in Connecticut has that question on the top part of the paper.
That's right. It's on the ballot, so you can just. The League of Women Voters is encouraging people to vote yes on that issue.
Is there any reason to vote? There doesn't seem to be any reason to vote no.
There's no historic reason. There's a lot of data from almost 40 states that use this, and there's no downside to it.
The other thing that I mentioned to you before is when you go to the polls to vote, there must be a sample ballot there for you to look at before you vote. Isn't that right?
There is a sample ballot there that you can look at. You can ask questions of the moderator, the moderator is the person who's in charge of the polling place. And they will answer any question, and they have so many resources for people. For example, they have like an iPad that will translate everything into 75 different languages. So if you have somebody who doesn't speak English very well, they can use this device to understand fully what's happening at the polling station. The moderator is also the person who can give you a provisional ballot. So say, for example, you show up at the polls and they say, I'm sorry, but your name's not on the voter list. We don't have you as a registered voter. You can ask for a provisional ballot. And
can you just say, I want to register right here and now?
Well, you can go to town hall and register and come back.
Okay.
But if you don't want to do that, you can get a provisional ballot, and then they will accept that and put it aside. And then at the end of the day, they will review those and see if you are an actual voter in that town, and then they'll accept the ballot.
Okay. So when you go to the polls, make sure to look at the ballot first before you take it into your voting booth. Now, that's on Election Day, and make sure you know where your polling place is, because if you have a town that has more than one place to vote, depends on your neighborhood where you're living, right? So how do you find that out?
Well, on vote411.org, you write, it's a League of Women Voters sponsored electronic voter guide. So you type in your address, and it will tell you whether you're registered to vote, so you can check your voter registration there. It'll tell you where your polling place is, what hours the polling place will be open, and it will show you a sample ballot of what you're going to get. And the nice thing about that is you're sitting at your kitchen table and you see a name that you don't know. It gives you a chance to go research that person. And what the League of Women Voters does is everybody who's on that ballot is sent a questionnaire, and they can answer that questionnaire, and so you can read their responses to all these, maybe 5 or 7 questions.
So you're reviewing candidates' positions on the issues.
And you do it in the comfort of your own home, so that when you go to the polling place, you're not standing in the booth saying, gee, I've never heard of that person. Who's that?
All right.
I mean, it might be a wonderful person.
So we have that now showing everyone.
There you go. Vote411.org.
Very important. Very, very good advice.
That's one of the things that we have spent a lot of time working on.
Okay, well, that's
because there are a lot of candidates and trying to get all their information logged in. And then we also have links to the debates on that site so that you can watch the candidates debate. And I love the live debate because you see the whole thing straight from the candidate's mouth. It's not just a sound clip that somebody has taken out. You get their whole thought process.
So you can get a schedule of the different debates on that website.
They'll be scheduled ahead of time, but then now that the debates are over,
you can see them.
You can actually watch the whole debate on that site.
All right. All right, so now let's talk about the most important thing. One of them is that today, right now as we speak, people are voting in Connecticut. And I went on the very first day. It was exciting.
It was.
On October 21st. The hours were from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then they changed. So talk about the early voting and how that's working out.
Well, we have been advocating for early voting for 12 or 16 years probably. This is something that the League of Women Voters has really fought for, and we're so excited to have it. There are 14 days, not the day before Election Day, not the 4th, but for
So
14
the
days
third
before.
is a Sunday, so you can actually vote on Sunday. And
but
the hours are a little different on Sunday. They're, do you know what they are on
no,
Sunday?
I don't
Okay.
want to say it because I'll be
Okay.
wrong. But you can. And go to vote411.org and they'll tell you.
Okay, but between October 21st and November 3rd,
That's right.
I know that most of the hours are from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., but there are some days when it goes till 8 p.m.
8
and
p.m. or
that
even
may
8
be- yeah.
a.m. Mhm.
But you have a chance to vote on a Saturday or a Sunday
right.
when perhaps you're not working. And
That's
you have more
right.
time to get to the polls, and the vote for early voting will always be only in one location in each town or city. in
That's up to the
Connecticut?
town.
That's up to the town.
But it is very expensive to do this, so
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
In most of the smaller towns, it's probably
Most of the
just in
smaller
one
towns just
place.
have one. In our area, it's usually at the
Right.
town hall. Groton has it at their community center, but most of the towns it's at the town hall.
So you want to do early voting between now and November 3rd. You
For
contact your town, or you can walk into your town hall
Yep,
and ask them,
and it'll probably be right there.
and it will be right there,
Yep.
and you can vote that
Right.
very minute.
And the ballots are locked up into a safe vault overnight.
Well, they put in envelopes similar to the
Absentee.
ballots, and then they are opened and reviewed
On election day.
on election day, just the same way that we've always opened the absentee ballots, usually
That's
on the
right.
afternoon of election day,
Yep.
and they get counted.
Yep. In East Lyme, in my hometown, we had 780 people vote on the first day and about the same on the second day. We have 13,000 registered voters. So that's a high percentage of people are voting early.
So this is a good thing.
It's a good thing. And one thing is, once I vote, the candidates know that I've voted. So they will no longer mail me expensive mailings.
Very, very important.
So I can save my candidates some money and not
help-
marketing to me anymore.
Exactly. It helps because now everything is so electronic. Once you're voting, you're already canceled off the rolls. So
That's
the
right.
campaign is not going to have to call you and
Exactly.
send you literature. That's a very, very key thing
Exactly.
For that.
But I think it's important, speaking about technology, that our tabulators are not connected to the internet. So no one can hack into our tabulators that are counting the votes.
Okay.
Like when you put your paper through that machine, it's not connected to anything else.
Okay.
So no one can hack in and do that. And I think that it's important for people to understand that.
It's also important to appreciate the people who work the polls.
Oh,
And I mean, we live in a state where, fortunately, we haven't had any violence. We haven't had people fighting about fraud. But around the country, so many people who work at the polls are afraid to do that again because they've seen themselves be accused of fraudulent tactics. We know there are law cases about that, big time
That's right.
cases. What's your thinking about that, the people who work at the polls?
well, it goes back to prejudice against women. Most of the poll workers are women. Most of our registrars of voters are women. Town clerks are women. And it's dangerous to be a woman in politics. Around the world, it is.
Wow.
They are threatened. Their children they threaten them with their children. That's one of the big reasons why women don't go into politics, is because it's so dangerous. And that's nothing new. And this is.
So you think that's still a leftover from?
Absolutely,
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
I look at Nancy Pelosi's husband being beat up.
Yeah.
I mean, women are at high risk when they go into these roles, and it's just been magnified over the last 10 years.
Wow. But in Connecticut, we have a good record of
We do.
peaceful.
We do.
Peaceful protests, peaceful work at the polls.
We do.
But let's face it, Joanne, we live in a country where there are many states where people are afraid of what might happen on election day.
Oh, absolutely, and with good reason. The threats are there.
Yeah.
There are so many threats that it's almost uncountable.
Do you think we're prepared for that? Are you hoping that that we've learned our lesson from 4 years ago and what happened then?
I think that we're better prepared now.
I mean, I remember in some of the states, some of the battleground states, on the day after the election, when the workers were trying to tabulate the votes, there were people in the hall banging on the doors, almost breaking the glass, violently trying to get in because they're screaming that they were doing something wrong in the tabulation.
Right.
That kind of mindset, does it still exist this year? I think it
Absolutely. It's bigger this year.
might. There are still people who feel there was fraud when there wasn't.
Absolutely.
That's kind of scary. How do we change that?
Well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to educate voters and empower voters. That's what I wake up and do every day.
Yeah. What do you think in terms of greater participation? I think we were saying earlier we maybe get 80% of our registered voters will vote in a national election. How much more percentage do you think we could get? Because we have the early voting now, you can go anytime.
I am so excited. I can't wait to see the number.
Yeah.
Because of the early turnout, it gives me great encouragement that maybe we'll get
90%?
a good percent.
Wow,
I hope
100%.
so.
But again, we still have the job of registering so many who are completely either alienated from the system or just have no interest.
Just no interest. They think it doesn't matter, but it does.
We take so much for granted in America.
It does matter.
Yeah,
it really
does.
does.
Matter. All right. Do we have any other final slides? Can we show them again, just so we can recap what we've talked about today in terms of the elections? Okay. Early voting until November 3rd. Make sure to contact your town hall to know exactly where you can go for the early voting and the exact hours. I know now during the week they're 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, have you voted yet? I did. Register, vote, it matters. That's what Joanne says. We have to listen to her. What else do we have? This one is very important. I think it's terrific. Vote411.org. As Joanne says, you can get lots of information about the candidates, what the ballot looks like, where you're going to vote. It sounds like a fantastic resource, right?
Yeah, we're proud of it.
All right, Joanne, what have we not covered? What do we still need to say about the elections this year?
I think that we've done a good job. I would ask people to be patient on election night, that we may not have a result on election night, and that's okay. Allow the counters to get a good and accurate count in all the states that we have.
Okay, be patient.
Be patient, be kind to your registrars of voters and your town clerks. They work so hard, and they really try to prepare a safe and fair election for all of us.
Okay. And realize how, whether you call it a right or a responsibility.
It is both a right and a duty to vote. A lot of people worked very hard to get us the right to vote, and it's out of respect for them.
And what about the people say, well, I can't vote for either of them. In so many of these races, we get we call a binary choice. It's either one or the other. Not voting is often a vote for one person or the other, right? Mm-hmm. How do you tell people that even if they're not thrilled with each side, they still should vote?
Well, one is going to be better than the other. So that's what you do. You're like Joe Biden says, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. So choose the better one. And also register in a party, and it could be any party. It could be the Green Party or the Independent Party. Register in a party so that you can vote in the primary. Because in the primary, there could be 6 choices.
Right.
And so there you have more say.
Right. But even I understand over the years, less and less people, we have more and more unaffiliateds who are.
And so they can't vote in a
Then
primary.
you can't vote in a primary. And you can't
Connecticut.
complain about who's
Exactly. You'll have
All
more
right.
choices if
All
you're
right.
in a party.
Give us one final pep talk about the importance of voting in the elections. And
Oh my
then
gosh.
we're done.
Your voice is your vote. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We need all hands on deck. This is an important election. Please make your voice heard. We need you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joanne, the president of
My
the
pleasure.
League in Connecticut, the whole state.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. We'll see you at the polls
Okay.
as well as on Talkback. Bye. Don't forget, November 5th and before. Any day before. Bye.